Welcome to the Saturday, June 20th, 2020 meetup, Coast Division NMRA. Good morning.
Morning, Phil.
Good morning, all.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Hi.
Good morning.
I will probably give it a few more minutes. It's at 9 o'clock. It's always interesting in getting everybody up in the morning. So.
Say, Phil.
Yes,
got a
sir.
question. Next weekend is the NMRA-X, the all-day clinics. Have we thought of maybe doing ours in the afternoon or evening?
We haven't. It's a great discussion. It's probably worth doing two things. One is we probably should go ahead and talk through the NMRA thing and say where it is and have everybody be able to get to it. Secondly, I'm more than willing to just either do one or two things. We can just skip next weekend, which would might make sense. Or like you say, get together afterwards just to have a bit of a dialogue about what people saw and what they found interesting. So either way, I kind of leave it up to the group.
Hey, Phil, this is Earl. I think you're better off maybe just pushing it for a week. You know, I think people only have so much time to allocate to these Zoom meetings, and, you know, a whole day of it is more than I can allocate.
I think that's probably not an unreasonable opinion.
And it gives you topics for the next week's Zoom meeting. We can talk about the previous week's NMRA-X event.
Exactly. That makes sense. That's good. So I think that seems like since no one spoke up and said they were dying to have a meeting next week, what we'll do is when I send out the video of this, I'll put that note in there and say we're skipping that. What I'll do is I'll get the NMRA-X details and put them in as well. So they'll be in the email that goes out for everyone. And then we'll plan on this not happening until the following week, which will be, I think, in July. Is that July 4th weekend?
Yeah, it's July 3rd, which is Saturday.
Saturday of July 4th weekend, which I'm not sure how many of us are going to be traveling for July 4th, so maybe it just doesn't matter that much this year. Any other year, I would say that was a bad time to have a call meeting, but maybe it doesn't matter this year. Again, kind of general feel, show of hands, should we have, if you go down to the bottom, there's the reactions, that little face, just put the thumbs up if you think we should go ahead and plan on the 3rd, even though it's July 3rd, to have a meeting. Just go ahead and give me a click. If I get about 5, that's enough. That's all it took. I just wanted to make sure that we had enough folks that would want to come that we went ahead and scheduled it. This is kind of cool. You get a cool democratic process.
By the way, July 4th is Saturday.
Right.
Oh, so it is July 4th. So this would be July 4th morning. That's good. We can be celebratory then. We'll figure out some fireworks of some kind.
Yeah, need a fireworks graphic. Yeah.
So someone has to have like 2 really old Rossi engines that can be some way figured out how to run them at maximum speed at each other for fireworks, for an explosion for us. I know I have some out in the storage cube that my uncle gave me that I should go look for. See, you wire 2 pieces of the track with DC that end and just fire out so the engines can be going maximum speed at each other. Let us be a little juvenile on 4th of July again, our childhood.
There's a prototype for that too.
Sometimes I think that it's amazing how many times the prototype goes model typical. I have a half-written article. I was on the Cumberson Toltec, and we were at the top there at the restaurant, and there seemed to be a lot of delay, and I went out and the engine was stopped way down at the end, and there was a lot of, there were folks walking around the engine. I decided I'd walk down there and see, and it turned out while the engine was over the switch, someone, the conductor, who looked like he was about 18, decided it was time to throw the switch, and the engine drove through the switch back, through the switch points. And it turns out that actually bends the rod and pushes the switch. The switch didn't move that much on the ties, so it bent the rod in between, so they couldn't throw the switch. And they were looking at it, and I said, guys, I think we got to pull all of the the spikes out and move the switch stand so you can move the points the right place so you can move the engine. To me, it was kind of a logical step, kind of one of those model railroading things you do. So I actually have some pretty interesting pictures of kind of them taking it apart and moving it and actually how bent it is. So, and my thought was that was a great article to say when the prototype goes model typical. Instead of this, you know, instead of prototypical, it's model typical. Anyway, with that, and by the way, that was just a quick way of wasting some time. So I want to start off then. I'm going to introduce LocoFi and the concept of what LocoFi is. And so I have to tell you, I have this vague memory of being at a great train show probably last year, San Jose, Pleasanton, I believe. And I saw this LocoFi, and I kind of looked at it, and it was Wi-Fi to your Loco. And, you know, I kind of heard that, well, you know, Bachman has this direct wireless stuff. And I, by the way, use MRC, and MRC has a really good little Wi-Fi module you can plug in, you can connect to, and you can run WeThrottle. And because it doesn't go through a router and a computer and ... like you do with JRMI, it's actually pretty responsive. And I kind of looked at it and I said, that's not something I'm going to spend my time and be interested in. I happened to be on a session last week, and what I realized in the discussion was that there may be something here, and not just from a product perspective, because I think there's some interesting things with this implementation of product, but really with the thought process. You know, if you think about DCC, it was designed by the Lens Company in 1980. For those of us who are in technology, you know who you are, think about what you knew about technology in 1980 and compare it to what you know about technology today. I mean, guys, you got to understand, this is like designing your railroad control system with the solution sets that took us to the moon. I mean, it literally is at that level. I mean, I remember we were doing packets and protocols in I was really thinking about this over the past few days. And so what has happened here with LocoFi is a concept that's very interesting. When they put DCC and the signaling with the rails, they put the signaling down in an area where it's noisy, it's challenging to get it across, that limits your bandwidth, introduces errors, introduces all sorts of things. In the intervening 30 years, Wi-Fi, and by the way, interesting perspective, I will make a bet that 70% of the video connections on this call are being done on Wi-Fi. Just bet, just odds, if you put your hands up, it'd be 70%. So you got to think
Probably
about what I just said. I mean, we have taken this Wi-Fi thing, the irony of wireless, from something to your engine. If you'd asked them in 1980, if you come in 1980 and said, no, this is bullshit, this DCC stuff, we want to use wireless in the engine, everybody would have laughed at you. We're now at the point, and they're putting Wi-Fi in things that are NATs. And so when it was just this moment when it said, what we've done is we've taken the control plane instead of being with the power plane. And in telecom, we talk about the control plane and the media plane. And when you want to get the control plane away from the media plane. So for example, when you set up this meeting, you're talking to a server in Zoom, but the meeting video is running through a whole different set of servers. They're separate. What this does with Wi-Fi between something in your engine, and in this case, it's a phone in your engine, it could be a computer system in your engine, it could be whatever, it actually changes the paradigm because we move from a noisy, low bit rate channel with a very limited control scheme in DCC to what's essentially a high bit rate channel. You can download, you know, if you wanted to have a billboard car that was an LCD on the side of it, you could have a Wi-Fi chip in the car and a little applet, and you could download billboards to your car and have them change as it went down the layout. I mean, it sounds absurd, but literally that's what you can do with this technology. The mind boggles. We're going to talk about a decoder that is Wi-Fi to your phone. And as we talk about that, I want you to think about that $6 drone camera, and we now have a Wi-Fi 100 megabit channel. At the club in Pleasanton, about 3 years ago, I brought down a GoPro session. I don't know if you've seen a little square cube. They have what they call a monitor that you can run on a Android or iPhone. And I run it on an iPad about this big, put it behind the glass, connect it up, and it shows you what the camera sees. And it's got a red button so you can push to record, but we just run it there as the monitor. And what it does is lets me have this great conversation with kids about the difference between real speed, 1 mile an hour on the layout, and scale speed, what your eye would see if you were 1/48 side. It's a brilliant concept. But what's really interesting is, if you've ever been to the Pleasanton Club, that camera's, that iPad's in the middle, and the train is running around the O-scale layout underneath those mountains that are built out of essentially an RF block, which is what wire mesh is covered with, and there's like 2 layers of those in some places, and the signal never drops. So I realized is in a typical modeler's club, in typical modeler's location, if you've got a 20 by 15 room with your layout in it, this Wi-Fi is going to be perfect to run that, and you can run video over it. You can run other things over it. I think once we realize that we now have a fundamentally different channel from whatever we're at to our engines than DCC gives us, is transformational. The product here, to my mind, was just really interesting because of 2 things. And there are 2 applications, I think, for folks that are on this call. The first is, if you do an engine with this technology, you can take it to anyone's layout and you control it directly from your phone. By the way, my application, as I put in the note, if you didn't read all the way down, we're talking about building a big ON30 layout at the NMRA convention next year. One of the challenges, we have multiple control systems. We use MRC and CCC. There's some that use NCE. I think some use Digitrax. So one of the questions becomes, what do we use on a combined layout, et cetera, et cetera. If you're not the club that this was the one that's chosen, do you have the right controls? How do you do it? What's interesting about this is I can do a couple of engines and then take those engines, and regardless of the control system choice, I can just run them directly from my phone when I want to be on the layout. One of the comments is, well, phones don't last that long. It's only 2 or 3 hours is typically how long I operate. I actually use an iPhone. I have an iPhone 4 I use, I've kept for years. I actually use as a cab. Occasionally it shows because it gets the kids interested with the MRC. So that's one really interesting application, the idea that you can have kind of a universal engine. The second thing is, I had a couple of members actually send me emails saying, hey, you know, I'm interested in going to DCC. Are there people who can help me? It's a really interesting way to not go to DCC, but to take 1 or 2 engines. So if you're a DC modeler, you've had, you know, you have 20 or 30 engines, your layout's wired for DC, 90% of the time, 95% of the time, DC's fine. Running an engine's great, but you'd like to have that operation. Doing a couple engines with this allows you to have sound and the control of DCC without rewiring your layout. Again, and by the way, as I said, and I want to be really careful, as I said in the little note, I have not tried this at all. I'm really excited about it because I think it's technically great, and I thought it'd be great for us to see a demo. So with that, I'm going to throw it over, and we actually have, I think, 3 different cameras here. Rajesh, here, I want to throw it to you. So, and by the way, if you want to, you can throw this in speaker view. And when we actually get to some of the demos, if you click on the picture, you'll get 3 dots. And if you click on the 3 dots, you'll be able to pin the video and see that specific thing, even though, because what's going to happen is the talking is going to come from one window and the image to look at is in another one. So you may want to click on the one to look at. I'll see if I can do that for you. Let me see if I can lock the images. Go ahead.
Yeah, Phil, would you be able to give me the control to share the screen?
I certainly will.
Okay.
I should have done that already. You have it.
Okay. Thank you. So first of all, I want to thank Phil and for bringing me on board. I really feel very honored and delighted to be presenting LocoFi to the Coast Division here. And yeah, I met Phil, last week on one of the other Zoom sessions, and he really asked some great questions, and we connected with, and we had a very interesting discussion there. And the result was that I'm here today in front of you guys, and I want to thank all of you who've made it to this presentation. So with that in mind, I will start with LocoFi. First of all, another thing, I've been to many Bay Area clubs around here, and I've met many of you, as you may have, and I've probably looked at LocoFi in action, most likely. So if you have not, then here is the introduction to the system. So what is a LocoFi? So I'm just gonna start with a very brief presentation. It's like 3 or 4 slides, and then I'm gonna switch over to our website, which pretty much has all the information and has it's like another presentation in itself, so where you can get some details. I'm just gonna point out some resources there. All right, I hope everyone can see my screen.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so LocoFi itself originated from pretty much 2 words, the simplicity and the Wi-Fi. So
Why don't you just jump to the picture? Just jump to the diagram, and let's just talk about the diagram.
okay.
So guys, so let me explain this really quickly because I think it's probably faster for me. So basically, what you see on the right is a module. The module basically is similar to a decoder, except it doesn't talk DCC on the tracks using the NMRA-DCC signaling standard. It talks through Wi-Fi, and it can do that either through a router to an app on a phone, and it's an Android phone, or it can talk directly to a phone without a router, but that means you can only control one engine at a time because you actually have a direct link. So basically, the module gets the power from the tracks, and that's all it gets from the tracks. The control all comes through the Wi-Fi, and what you see on the left is the app that runs on the phone. And the point here is that if you have multiple phones running the app at the same time, then the app and the phone talks to the other phones so that they run a shared list. So it's essentially, if you think about applications, it's a distributed application that's distributed in multiple locations. Those locations are interacting with each other. So if you have, for example, 10 engines on the layout, they will all come up and say, I'm here when they power up. That will get distributed to all 4 phones. So all 4 phones will have a list of all 10 engines. If one phone app decides to take an engine, then the other apps will see that that engine has been taken and controlled by that phone. So there's this kind of what's called a distributed mesh computer architecture between the phones. So you don't have to have a central control point. The phones self-organize with the engines as they come up into this Wi-Fi network. So for those of you that are really technical, that's kind of how it works. For those of you that are not technical, what's really brilliant about this is that if you have 4 people to come together, they all turn their apps on, they turn their engines on, everybody gets to see everybody else's engines, and when you pick an engine, everybody else knows that you're controlling that engine when you drive it around. So it's kind of magical if you want to think about it that way, that you don't have to worry kind of about who has what because it's self-organized. Is that a reasonable description?
Yeah. So each phone, each cab basically knows all about the other cabs. I'm wondering, does the owner of the cab identify himself? Like, this is Charlie, this is Phil, so that if I want to know who's controlling locomotive 1, 2, 3, 4, it says Phil.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
The cool thing about this, guys, is this is an app like every other app on your phone. And, and the app, when it comes up, it knows it's on your phone. It knows who you are. You can go in and tell it, the cool thing about this is that once you get here, all of the new stuff is in a phone app. And there are a million of those. And it's a lot of this stuff is written in Java and JavaScript, and there, it's code that there are lots of people that know how to do. So the point is, it really becomes easy to do stuff like that. You have a name in it, you can exchange names. You could even, I mean, there's interesting, again, and by the way, this stuff doesn't exist in what's here, but think about the idea that you put in something that's for two of these to be working together to control a train together. So you have a helper function. So when you have the helper function, if you and I go into helper function, what happens is we now get a little window in our app that pops up. That's our communication window for us to communicate in the helper function. I mean, this is the kind of stuff you can do once you get out of the constrictions of what kind of, quite frankly, an older architecture does. And by the way, there's no reason you couldn't connect this into JRMI and take outputs from that and do things, but it's not there today. But anyway, so that's kind of the architecture. And I think it's really important to understand it, because that's what got me excited. Well, I want to suggest go ahead and jump from there to whatever else you were going to go to.
Okay. Well, Phil explained it very, very beautifully, actually, very, very nicely. Essentially, it's, as I say, in the age of IoT, we are bringing a bunch of computers together to talk to each other. And we know IoT is here, and with the possibilities that are endless, and it's the interconnectivity, not between just the locomotives, the apps. You can hook it up to any kind of automation. The future is really kind of limitless here, and that's what we are aiming to expand into. And the app itself, I mean, most of this software is, this functionality is driven by software. And the fact it is Wi-Fi, we can update it over the air. We just keep delivering it, whether you have the module or not. The functionality keeps on enhancing. With automation, you could just, for example, get up in the morning and you could just have a train that goes right by your coffee maker, and you just press a button, or at 6 a.m. in the morning, it automatically goes there. The coffee maker could be integrated into the system. The coffee maker will switch on, fill up your cup, and the train will bring it back to maybe a bedside or something. So I mean, these are the kinds of things that are possible with this interconnectivity, and this is possible especially because of Wi-Fi. The fact it can support such large bandwidth, and it's so reliable, and it's probably very close to as old as even DCC actually. The networking itself is pretty old, and wireless was just another abstracted layer. And I believe DCC probably works with Ethernet in some ways, and I've seen people use Ethernet here. I'm not very familiar with DCC, so pardon me there. So that's the kind of possibilities that open up here. And we are already seeing it in our current implementation, where each engineer is actually talking to each other, like in a primitive way. Like we know which engineer is controlling which locomotive, but as Phil said, we could just have like a chat functionality, or a button which would say you are clear to go, and maybe a dispatcher functionality, and you actually talk to the dispatcher and say, hey, I'm waiting at this signal here, and the dispatcher would with the other automation controls around it, and they are also going to be Wi-Fi as well. So you will just know, the dispatcher will, for example, know what the current situation of the trains is, and when it sends the clear signal to the operator, just to the engineer, he just has to do it through the app. And so this is basically, and let me go over to another slide here.
So are you
So-
the primary developer, or do you have a team of people, or is it open source software so that people can add to the functionality?
I am the primary developer. We are a team of actually 3 people. Uh, we are 3 partners here, and my other 2 partners, they take care of mostly like marketing, selling, and those kinds of things. Like accounting, shipping, handling, and stuff. I am primarily the software developer and the hardware developer, and the whole concept behind it. So when we talk of model railroading as a system, it consists of pretty much in the LocoFi world 4 things: power, access point, a smartphone, and the LocoFi module itself. Now, if you actually look at each of these things, except for power, everything else needs power. So power is kind of universal out there. Now, everything else there is actually a mini computer. It's a small computer in itself. The smartphone is a computer first, and then a phone. And that's the power that smartphone brings to us. And LocoFi itself has 2 microcontrollers in it, which are pretty powerful in themselves and can do pretty aggressive Wi-Fi processing. And obviously the access point, which kind of brings all the devices together into the network. And another thing to note here, which is probably not mentioned in some of our documentation very explicitly, is the module itself can act as an access point. A smartphone can itself act as an access point, and you don't need an external router. But of course it is desirable for if you need like a very robust system. So the LocoFi module itself could act as a router in itself. And as I said.
So guys, so we're having a lot of text speak. So when we say it can act as a router, what that says is you can connect your phone. In your phone, it comes up and you see your engine as an access point in your phone list. You click on that and your phone is directly connected to the engine. So basically think about it as direct connect. So when they say act as a router, it means direct connect, which again, that's that cool thing that lets you take an engine anywhere and run it on anything.
Absolutely. Now let's go back to the first point, which is power. Now this system is universal, as Phil was mentioning, in the sense it can take any DC power or DCC power. You don't really need to have a very specific set of power, because, for example, in DCC you need a specific type of power because it is also used to transfer the control. With LocoFi, the control is all over the air. It's all Wi-Fi. So you kind of separate the power from the control. And when you have that separation, you are actually very flexible with what you can use to even power your layout. For example, you can actually use AC to power your layout. The only thing we don't do inside our module is we obviously do rectification, but you also need to have like a filter capacitor, and which is actually a pretty large component. And just because in the context of HO scale, that capacitor is pretty large, we don't actually include it as part of our module. But for example, if you were into like O scale or G scale, it is very much feasible. So if you had like AC powering your tracks, you just put a bridge rectifier and a filter capacitor and you just feed it to the module, you're good to go. And just because it takes DC power, you can run it with battery and
So guys, let's jump on. I'm concerned. Getting lots of questions about the module. Let's jump on to talk about the module and kind of how you install the module, because I think that's kind of the thing most folks are interested in, right? It seems to be a lot of questions on the thing. So what does the module look like? How do you install it?
So the module itself,
You have, yeah, go ahead. You have a picture or two?
I can actually, our website has tons of videos on it. They explain the entire installation process for the one who really is like a newcomer to the hobby. It has like step-by-step instructions to install, soldering each connection. And
Do you just have a loose module? Just hold it. Let's just
oh, yeah.
stop screen sharing and just hold up some things so we can see what a module
There's
looks like. It has to be installed just like a DCC decoder.
Right.
Right.
So this is our second generation module, and I would be honest here that we had a first generation module which was about 40% larger than this module, and it was going around the Bay Area clubs and talking to many modelers, and the first thing that I was suggested was the module is too big for HO. And we took it as a priority to come up with a smaller module which was easily feasible, and this is just the beginning. I mean, I can already, even though we designed it,
So just hold it up. Hold it up. Hold it up. So hold it up. So you see.
Sure.
So if you buy a Soundtrax DCC decoder, you basically get a little package. What you see here, not the speaker, but the other part is wrapped essentially in a shrink wrap, and it's got a set of leads off of it. You've got to wire it. What there does not exist in this today is an 8-pin or 21-pin plug-in module or a 21 PNP module. I mean, quite frankly, it's pretty nascent technology. So the only way to do this today is you're going to get this, and it's got essentially 2 wires that go for power, and those need to go to your wipers. It's got 2 wires to the motor. You have to isolate the motor just like with DCC. So if you've ever done a DCC install, it's the same set of steps. It's got a headlight wire. It's got a back wire. I don't know if it's got any other outputs, but it's basically, if you've ever done that, and the speaker that comes with it is typically the kind that would fit inside of a diesel locomotive. But yeah, so by the way, this is one of the things. This is not a beginner toy thing. It is literally just like a DCC decoder to install. And if you can't do it yourself, you need to get someone to do it. But the cool thing is, once you've done this, you don't have to buy the $400 base system and cab. You just download the app on your phone and it's running. Mm-hmm. And again, by the way, and again, full disclosure, I want to get one of these and try one. I haven't done it yet, so I am talking about the possibility more. But it seems to me it's a pretty cool thing to do. Pretty cool way to do it.
Right, and that is one of the other aspects is we just sell this thing. We don't sell the router. We don't sell the power packs, and we don't sell the smartphones.
Do you have the packaging, the box? Why don't you show them the box? Yeah. Show them the box you sent. So you don't. One of the things is when you get the Soundtrax decoder, it comes in a little chink. This actually comes with more instructions and stuff, and I think it's kind of designed a little bit more to walk you through the process too.
So this is like the typical box you would receive when you receive the shipment, and it consists of our contact card here, and we have these brochures which explain the technology. It's all on our website too, but we just send it out as printed material too. It has the technology, and is even a product catalog, a very minimal basic products that we are coming out with. And then it comes with install guide, which is pretty much 3 steps. Isolate the motor and 7 wire connections, obviously 2 for power, 2 for motor, so that kind of makes it double, but it's like still the 7 wire. And then it comes with, other documentation like the config setting. There is also like sound editing guides, and that I'm going to talk about in detail more, that you can edit your own sound. So it's what you call like a pretty open source system. It's not proprietary. It can run anywhere. You can use any third-party phone, any third-party router, any third-party power packs. We don't sell any of that, which is custom, proprietary, or it just meshes with only a few systems. So that's the power of this technology. And what comes in package is this is the package that contains the module and some of the other accessories. It comes in this anti-static packaging and has the module inside. We open the module for you. Module itself is wrapped in Kapton tape. Kapton tape because it's thin, it's highly insulating, and the speaker is already pre-wired. You're free to use any other speaker if you want to. I don't see a reason why you should, because this is a very high-end, pretty premium speaker. And then we also send out some other accessories, like for those who are just starting out or just on DC locomotive, we send out a bunch of LEDs, some extra wires, heat shrink tubing, Sure.
Sorry about that. Just mute.
Okay. So we send out this SD card adapter to load your sounds. The module, as you must have noticed, it comes with this micro SD card on board, and which you can just take out and put your own sounds if you want to change the sounds. And the sounds themselves are WAV files. They're very easy to edit using some free softwares over the internet. We have complete guides regarding, and if you go through them, you will see how easy it is, and it may even seem like another modeling aspect, just like your track work or scenery or electronics. Sound editing is could become another interesting aspect, and for those people out there.
So again, this is one of those things where I think the technology speak doesn't really explain what was said. So the deal here is when you hit the whistle button, it sends a command right now to the module to say, play the whistle sound. The whistle sound is a WAV file. What you can do is you can put a WAV file you have chosen as the whistle sound. Right. So if, for example, if you have an engine and nobody has ever had the whistle that was put on that engine and you want to really replicate the sound, and there's a YouTube video of that engine doing a pass-by with the whistle blowing, you can grab the sound off the YouTube soundtrack, throw it in Audacity, AUDICITY. It's a free editing software. It's for audio. I've used it for years. You can throw it in, edit it down to a little WAV file, save that, and now that can be loaded into the decoder. Now, it's a little complicated because you got to go through this step of putting it right now, but the interesting perspective is, one of my thoughts as modelers is, years ago I bought a thing called a Philips Pronto. It was a little remote control, and they created a community where the remote control was done with bitmaps for your icons of your video recorder and that to record your AV. It was to manage your AV stuff. And what happened was all those bitmaps and all those scenes got put in a file in a community, essentially, where people could put their stuff up there and people could grab it and reuse it and share it. And I'm thinking that there's this really interesting thought process for all of us around having sound profiles. So, imagine building the actual sound profile of a specific engine in 1963, what it would have been based on that you got a whistle that was the whistle it had in a different engine, and then putting that somewhere where other people could use it or use those sounds. So I think there's this whole sound thing's really interesting. The sounds are there and work, but the ability to make sound essential. And there was something else, and this was actually a suggestion made on I think we were talking about this last night on the ACCRS, and someone made a really interesting comment. We haven't talked about this, so when I make the comment, said, well, what if you could listen to the sounds coming out of the headphone jack on your phone so that you were listening to everything through a headphone and it wasn't playing through speakers, so you could have all the sounds without having them actually around, which I thought was a very interesting comment, where we could have actually quiet model railroading. So again, sounds are a really interesting thing, but it's this idea of being able to personalize that I think becomes very interesting for some of us. Go ahead.
I'll just pause you here for 1 second here. We have sounds already coming out of two places: the onboard speaker and the smartphone. The smartphone currently supports only sounds which you would think of as if you're sitting inside a cab. For example, the light switches that you throw, or even the throttle. The throttle even has haptic control. So people have suggested, like quite a few people said, you have to always look at the screen. Well, it's not a V-throttle app, first of all. V-throttle, I've seen the interface, and you have to actually look at the screen and dial in those things and type it out. This has a virtual throttle. You just slide it up and down, just like 8 notches. And you can actually get the feel, just like when sometimes you put your phones on mute, you hear the motor vibrate, you put the phone on your vibrate. So it uses those haptic controls. So when you slide the switch, the throttle up and down, you could actually enable or disable, if you want to, the vibration, and you don't really have to look at the screen. But yes, of course, you may want to look at the screen if you want to check what speed your locomotive is going on, and it will tell you the actual scale speed once you have configured it according to the scale speed. So that's another interesting aspect. And you already have these cab sounds coming out, and we can definitely enhance the software to actually give the locomotive sound as you would hear inside the cab. Right now, our sounds are primarily of the type that come from the locomotive, as if you're standing at a distance and you have a locomotive approaching. So we try to do more prototypical kind of functionality here. So this kind of functionality is already there, and Phil, you're right about that. I mean, we have this duality of sound.
So in the interest of, for everyone, time-wise, we spent more time. We actually have a little demo. There's actually a little demo screen set up, and then there was actually showing it in a switcher. Let me see if I can pop those screens up. Can I spotlight those? And did I make it so everyone can see that?
Yeah, I just want to quickly go over the screen because, yeah, we are actually running out of time here. So how a simple install could be done in, for example, DCC ready type of locomotive. Now, DCC ready type of locomotives obviously were designed for DCC, and so they could also run on the DC, and that's why they have this 8-pin standard. The board that already comes, it supports certain voltages, and it has some small circuitry on it, and that's the reason we, because it's not LocoFi ready, so we have to actually get that board out and just solder the 7 wires as it is. But the good part about soldering the 7 wires with DCC ready locomotives is most of the time the LEDs are pre-installed in their sockets, and that's probably the hardest part of installing a DCC decoder in or a LocoFi module, in my opinion, is trying to figure out where things will fit. Otherwise, I mean, just soldering the 7 wires and you're good to go if you can get the module to get placed nicely. So I'm just gonna use this Jesse, small switcher as an example, and so this is the module which is I'm just gonna put right next to the switcher, so you can see the size comparison. Now, for example, this switcher already comes pre-wired with this LED and an LED at the back, and you just solder the white wire and the blue wire and the yellow wire for the lights as you probably already know, and the speaker probably would fit inside the cab, and the module can go right on top of this. Then you solder the black and the red wire to the power supply, and the gray and the orange wire. So the color coding is NMRA standard.
So by the way, if you have sufficient room and you have one of the 8-pin connectors, you can buy the 8-pin connectors from Tony's and solder them onto the decoder here, and then just plug it in. So
I just want to, Phil, I just want to point out this thing. DCC voltages are not DCC, sorry, LocoFi voltages are not DCC compatible as it is. And that's one of the reasons we
if they have more circuits behind the 8-pin connector.
Yes, yes. So
okay.
we have made it more simpler. We just get rid of that, and getting rid of that extra board, which is DCC ready, actually makes for more room for the module itself, and makes it more
okay, so you can't, so that's an important point. You can't use the existing DCC ready board, which is actually kind of interesting because the last couple I've done, I've taken them out anyway. But so you can't do the simple 8-pin. You have to take out the DCC ready board because it's not compatible with the output voltages, because your output voltages aren't 12 volts.
Absolutely. They were
so by the way, that's a really important point. Your output voltages for lighting are 5 volts, right?
They're actually 3.3 volts.
They're at 3.3. So basically what that says is, just again, for folks that look at doing this, those are compatible with LEDs. They're not necessarily compatible if you've got an older engine that's got a 12-volt grain of wheat light bulb in it. Right. So that's, I think that's kind of, so part of the thing here is a lot of the DCC ready locomotives, they're designed so the lighting is designed to run on up to 12 volts as the DC voltage increases in that. And so the problem is that when you try to run them in an environment like this, we're using 3.3 volts because it's all computer based, which is actually very good, except for what it outputs the motor, it's an issue. So what's interesting is as all the new engines have LEDs, this is much more compatible. It's not compatible necessarily with some older engines where you might have some issues you have to pay attention to.
In older engines, you typically have to already isolate the motor.
Right.
And once you have isolated the motor, you have to throw out the bulbs and replace them with LEDs anyways. Right. And the reason why we did not really make the board really compatible with DC, first of all, it's very different technology, and we didn't want to restrict ourselves to the 15 volts or around so much that DC uses, because the DCC ready board comes with some resistors and some LEDs which are appropriate for that amount of lighting.
So again, I think rather than spend a lot of time on why, the point's really important. The point is very simple. Today, to wire this up, you have to essentially take out the DCC ready board, go down to the wires themselves, isolate the motor, and then solder the decoder, and you have to. So it is an installation process.
It's not just the reasoning behind it. It's also the flexibility that comes with it. The LocoFi module can work with range of voltage from 7 volts to 24 volts.
No, I understand. I'm just trying to make sure that members. So the folks there, the questions have been, can you plug it in? Can you do that? I just want to make it really clear that if you buy this and you have a locomotive that it says on the box it's DCC ready, when you open it, there's going to be a board in it with a little plug. In order to install this, you have to remove that board, cut all the wires. You have to isolate the wires. If you have grain of wheat bulbs, they have to be replaced with LED bulbs. So there's a set of things that I just don't want any surprises of someone saying, oh, I didn't understand you could do that. So that's basically, if you think you want to use it, if you think you're interested, those are the things you're going to have to do. Cool.
Yes, and all of this is on our website, all the technical details.
So I tell you what, in the interest of time, why don't we jump, you want to jump over and do a quick little demo?
Sure. Yeah.
Cool.
I'm gonna...
By the way, any questions, just jump in and yell.
Gonna bring the smartphone in the view here.
And I'm spotlighting the locos running there on the screen so we can see.
But for those who are interested in looking at the operation on the smartphone, they might want to kind of, I don't know how to keep
I'll spotlight.
part
I
of
can
the
only
screen.
spotlight one thing. I'm spotlighting the smartphone right now.
I know. Okay, so smartphone, I just would like to show maybe things like multi-engineer, multiple locomotive control. So a single engineer can control multiple trains, and multiple engineers can obviously talk to each other as well. So it's a very, very distributed system. You rightly put that. So we have 4 locomotives on the layout. So we just say manage, and this gets highlighted. And let me bring this other phone here. So it's kind of hard to. So you just launch the app.
Yeah.
And you can see that's the engineer name. And it shows you that the first locomotive is being controlled by engineer 071, which is right here. You can see here. Now I just want to show you something else. We have the settings screen here, which is the smartphone setting, and I have disabled the splash screen. And these are, by the way, the settings to enable the cap sound or enable the vibration of the haptic control. I'm just gonna go back. I'm gonna exit the app. And it's gonna show me the engineer screen, where you can input your engineer name. I remember somebody asking this question. And obviously, once you have a smartphone, you're not gonna log in with different engineer names again and again. So you can actually.
Well, actually, let me say, Seth, an interesting thought if you had this running in an operating session, everybody could log in with the actual operating name for that layout. So in other words, if you were local 407, you would show up as local 407 as the engineer for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, for sure, or, you know, X whatever.
Yeah, it's just an interesting thought
helps.
process. Anyway, enough said.
So I let this engineer 10 control the UP, and it should soon show up on the screen here. So, and I'll say that let's do manage GT4. And, press this there. And you'll see a multiple train dashboard control here. So you can see this. So you click the name of the loco, and you go to the main dashboard of the loco, and I'll do the same here. And you will see 2 locomotives. You just switch from one locomotive to another just with a swipe of your finger, or you click on the tab at the top. And there's a speed control, and there is this config settings, which you can use to do things like auto reverse lights. For example, if you change the reverser, the lights would change. And you can reverse lights direction. For example, if you were to solder the wires incorrectly in your locomotive, like the front or the rear lights got reversed, you could just change the setting in the software without having to resolder any of those things. And you can also reverse the engine direction. For example, if you reverse fire the motor and you press forward, the engine goes in reverse. Just check this setting, and you're good to go. So there's
So for those of you that are not DCC people, this is kind of, you know, there's a CV and DCC to reverse the engine direction. So if you configure CVV, and I don't know which one is, somebody may know, from 1 to 2 or from 0 to 1, it'll reverse the direction of the motor. If you load NMRA up and are running on a computer, you can actually see that as an on-off switch. What's interesting here is, because the way this is built, you just kind of go immediately the on-off switch, and all that kind of gets hidden behind it because it's built in. So you're actually getting some of those kind of things made a little bit easier to get to.
Absolutely. And here's the number of speed steps, which can range from 8, which is the typical number of notches in a diesel locomotive, and all the way to almost 1,000 speed steps here. And you can configure the start speed step, a delay, which kind of mimics the prototypical math, and then you can set the scale speed, and there is a way to configure. We have a whole video on this, and it's explained in the guide. And then you can set the momentum and the accelerating momentum and the decelerating momentum. And going back to this, sorry, it's kind of hard to work behind another screen. All right, so here's, and then you can do some, if you need to do factory set, or you need to look at the local. One other thing I want to quickly show, when if you go back here on this screen, is you could actually rename your locomotive just by the click of this button. So, and if you have if you just got a new locomotive on your layout, just click on this menu here and say add loco. Oh, sorry. Add loco here, and you will see a list of bunch of locos here, and you could just select whichever one you want to add to your network, and it's that simple. So let's go back to the demo, and let's, if you want to see the throttle, it's up to you, or you can look at the demo of the layout here. And
I'm going to change the spotlight. I think the spotlight is what goes into the video. I'm going to change it over to the engines.
okay. You can see the speedometer and the train is off, and at the same time you could just click maybe another thing here.
Yeah. By the way, there's some talk on here about battery, and we actually have spent more time than I planned. I hope everybody's comfortable with it. If you actually go to the LocoFi website, you'll see that they're actually trying to design and build what I would call a battery keep alive board. If there's interest, we can ask them to spend a little time on it. Basically, it's a board that's designed to connect to a battery, charge the battery up instead of capacitors, as a keep alive. And so I think it's kind of interesting when you come down to the dead rail. You actually could have a layout where none of the switches had any power, and you only had power on main rail sections. Anyway, I'll let you go back to the demo.
So I could, depending on time, I could show you some switching here if you wish to. I mean, it's a very intuitive and very simple interface, and something, and with all the prototypicalness and all the config settings, and we are coming out with different features like for example, we'll soon be adding consisting. The app will be coming to iOS, and there'll be a host of other.
Can I ask a question before you can, the group that's here? So there's a big difference between programming Android and iOS, and I'm an iPhone user. And first comment was, oh, it's only Android. My reaction was kind of, oh shoot. And then it kind of hit me, well, I keep that iPhone 4S, my old iPhone 4S, I keep it in my box to take to shows, to use as a throttle, because I get it all powered up. And quite frankly, using it as a throttle, it's fine. And then my phone's still in my pocket, and I know it's charged up to take phone calls and that. and there was a comment, you can buy $40 Android phones, and then it hit me that I bought a $60 8-inch Android Fire and Amazon Fire tablet a couple of years ago, and somebody told me you can buy a 7-inch for $35 online, and it kind of hit me that I'm not sure I'd use my personal phone for this. I'm just kind of, it's a thought process. Does anybody, if it doesn't support iPhone and you've got an iPhone, does anybody really care? Would you be willing to buy a $40 or $50 tablet or Android phone to use with it, separate from your phone? And would that actually be preferable? Just kind of comments and thoughts. I'm trying to understand whether it's really a priority to have iPhone and spend a lot of time porting the software, or focus on features that would make this more valuable to modelers like us. And that's why I'm trying to really make this input to the company of, is that an important focus, iOS, or is it more important as a focus to get more functionality, maybe make, sound editing easier? Just thoughts from you guys. What would get you more excited about it?
Well, I'm just thinking if you're going to do, I'm thinking of somebody like, Dave Park's layout where he's got 25 guys showing up, right? Are you going to go out and buy 25 Android phones for those guys, or do you now expect everybody to bring an Android phone? That's the kind of thing I'm thinking about in terms of these large operating sessions.
That's right. Yeah, if you were using it exclusively for a large session, that would be an interesting question. Yep.
I would like to say one thing. Android phones, as far as Android phones go, they can cost less than $50, and they are probably way cheaper than any of the handheld throttles out there.
By the way, Charlie, so everybody here, let me tell you what I heard, because this is kind of almost marketing input for these guys, is if they're really successful and we got somebody like David Parks to say, I want to use this, then maybe at that point, iOS is really important. I think it's a really important, interesting question, but it's good.
Well, but the other way to think of it is maybe the operator culture changes. So then rather than a guy like Parks or others who have, large groups, maybe it's bring your own cab, right? Because rather than have to buy a dozen or 2 dozen or 3 dozen dog bones or whatever, the culture becomes, hey, I'm going to XYZ's operating session. I just bring my phone, and I know I'm going to be able to run the trains.
And by the way, I think the interesting thing to think about, if you think about that vein again, is the idea of, and this is not a tablet, but I've got my tablet that I bought that's an Amazon. So I bought an Amazon tablet on Black Friday for $60. It was one of these 8-inch deals a year and a half ago. Turned out it took about 5 minutes to jailbreak it. So you get out of the Amazon world and you get anything on Android, because I wanted to download a remote control app. So, what's really interesting is you could do exactly the same thing and you could have an 8-inch Android. And the interesting question is, I don't think we're that far away from being able to have that engine you take to Dave Park's layout to run, has a video camera in the front, and you're not running it with your phone. You're actually running it, and you've sat down somewhere and you're running the engine through a tablet, and the conductor's out on the layout doing the back end of the car moves, and you're actually relaxing, having a beer, running your engine.
Just like the prototype.
Just like the prototype. It's an interesting thought, and I think the point of, BYOC, bring your own cab, is a really, by the way, that's a term we're going to probably start using, right? I'm a BYOC layout. And you bring your own cab because I don't, and then the question is, if I'm bringing my own cab, do I want to use my cell phone so that when I go home, I lost power and I can't call? Or do I want to have a separate thing I bought just to be my cab that I bring around?
I would want to get a small tablet just for this, because I would want to have the video. I think you're right. I think we'll have video eventually. The cameras are certainly small enough, and I would rather have the screen big enough so I can have cab control on one side and video out the cab window on the other side of the tablet.
I would like to just say one thing in case I am not explaining it. The app is supported on Fire Amazon devices already. It's available.
Cool. Yeah, no,
so you don't even have to jailbreak.
No need to
jailbreak.
Yeah. So the one comment here, just one little annoying detail is home routers are typically limited to something like 20 leases. Somebody who's a little more familiar with them might know the exact number. And with all the IoT stuff and throttles running around, we're starting to have problems with running out of connections. So one thing for sure is put up a router for your layout room that doesn't do anything else.
That's right.
And then hopefully the consumer, Netgears and Linksys and Apples of the world will start making routers with more leases, but I've actually not seen too much of that.
The problem is you're limited, Seth, to 256 because when they chose,
I understand.
When NAT was created, this is an interesting problem. When NAT was created, they basically created the concept of a private address, which is a Class A address. So it's limited to 256, and it turns out you lose a few. So you're exactly right. But the idea of putting up, I think if you're building a layout or thinking through your electronics in a layout, as we talked about last week with structured wiring, I think the network, I would seriously think about doing at least one network panel with a router where you've got some stuff, because eventually I think we're going to see more and more things that are going to want to talk to the network, and some of them will be what we refer to as terrestrial or wired, and some will be wireless, but having a router there is probably a good idea. And the routers are cheap. And by the way, you don't necessarily need the latest generation either. We're not talking about the approaching 5G stuff or the latest version of Wi-Fi where you can do 300 megabits. One version back is generally good enough. A home router.
Yeah, Phil, I just want to say one thing. The routers can be easily configured if you want. Obviously, the typical home router is not powerful enough to support that many addresses, but you can configure the subnet mask to actually support a Class A network, which is like millions of addresses there. And the other thing is cool about Wi-Fi, and that's another power of Wi-Fi is you can actually have a mesh network. You can have multiple routers out there and multiple access points, and you still connect to one SSID, and you can cover we already know Wi-Fi network, for example, at an airport. You go from one end of the airport to the other end of the airport, and you just have the connectivity.
That's a good point. You can actually put an AP up. I tell you what, I think what I'd suggest is, do we want to continue on this vein, or is anyone interested? I don't want to not have kind of some time for discussion of modeling projects, et cetera. Kind of interest, do we want to continue this discussion, or we want to move to other discussions?
I think we should have an offline discussion. There are some of us who are really engaged, but I don't think that everyone is as engaged. Yep. I certainly would like to chat a lot more about this offline.
I tell you what, why don't I do this? Why don't I schedule a separate Wi-Fi session at some point? Does that make sense?
Sure, I would certainly like that.
Yeah, and I'll just send it out, and I'll make sure Seth's on, and he can invite, because he may have other folks he's interested in inviting. By the way, I just got excited about this because I think it just has all sorts of cool applications, but you're right, it really is something that you're really going to be, only some folks are going to be interested in. So why don't we go ahead and do that? We'll schedule another time, and we'll jump to other topics. Does that make sense? Cool. Thank you very much. That was brilliant.
You're welcome.
I got to go down here my reactions. It's really, I think it's really exciting to see the technology change, and in some ways it's kind of interesting. It's kind of like it's 1987 or 88, and you're seeing a demo of DCC, so, which was pretty cool. But I'm sure it was pretty cool for the folks that saw it back then.
Thank you so much.
Those of us who were playing around with CTC 16 back then.
Cool.
Oh, you're showing me.
So I'm going to throw it open for whatever's on anybody's workbench this week. Have anything interesting to talk about from the workbench? There we go. Seth's got hand up.
Yeah, I got a couple of updates on things we talked about last week and the week before. So on the Keep Alive, I had some discussions with Mark Schitzer, who had designed a considerably more sophisticated one, but the assembly skills are, at the extreme edge of what you can do without a pick and place machine. So we're going to stay with something more like what you were describing, and he had a suggestion or two. So that is in my queue for the next week. And then, presumably I'll have sample boards back a couple of weeks after that. So if somebody's interested in being a beta tester and assembling and playing with a couple of them, sometime mid-late July, just contact me offline. I'll have a few. The other thing on structured wiring that we talked about last week, after a little discussion, I showed you a tortoise adapter. We've made a change in the board so that one of the contacts is available on nice big screw terminals, so you can just handle the frog locally. And if you're interested in, getting some of those boards, go to my website. It shows tortoise adapter, and if I see a tortoise adapter from anybody from the region, I'll just hold them till I have the new boards in. So that makes wiring, yet another step easier. And the third thing was somebody sent me a link to a really cool set of male and female RJ adapters with just little press it and shove the wire in connectors on Alibaba. And the prices are like sub $5. And, if you're interested, again, send me a note offline. I could make a stocking order. It's, I personally don't need 50 of them, but, it's, I think between us, if there's some interest, I'd be happy to organize it, and I work with these vendors and supply chains anyway. So anyway, just a few updates, cool stuff, easy to do, not very expensive, especially if a bunch of us buy together.
Cool. Anybody else? Okay, so since nobody's going to talk about it, I'm going to share a screen here. We'll share this was my modeling projects for the week. Let me pop up here. So my focus has been getting my workspace reworked. I actually had a picture last week. I did a wood bin, and we did that little gray rack in the back, and I rebuilt this top. I actually, at one of the NMRA auctions, got this turntable of tools, which I have actually been using very effectively to drill the nut bolt washer castings on a whole bunch of piers for my module. And finally, after I'm not done, I have more bins and more parts to put away and a lot of things, but I am actually getting to modeling, and I actually am doing these two Frenchman River resin kits. And so I actually was pretty happy. My first step was the stack on the little gray one was actually a solid resin casting, and after a lot of trepidation, I started drilling it out, and I've drilled it out this far down, and I was told on a meeting last night that in fact the outside is a casing, and there's actually a separate stack inside that's about 60% of the diameter. So I'm going to re-drill a little hole in the bottom and put a brass tube up inside to represent the actual stack. So that was my modeling for the week. So come on, got to get everybody excited to put something else up. Right?
How are the Frenchman kits to work with?
I have to say so. I actually built, if you saw the pictures of that Moss Valley 12 by 24 module that they go on, what actually caused me in some ways to want to build a water module was their 4-car float they have with that's all in ON30, and I bought one of those. And I have to say I'm very impressed with the stuff. The quality of the resin is very good. Probably have filled maybe 10 occlusion holes in it, with ACC, where you had little bubbles in the resin, but not a lot of bubbles. Generally been very good quality. In fact, the car float, it has the cast-in rails, and they all came out really, really good. In fact, while everybody else talks, I'll see if I can find. I've got a couple of pictures of the car float. I can show you pictures of the car float because it actually is done and ready to go on the layout. Let me see if well, you guys, well, somebody else talks about what they're doing. I'll go see if I can find a car float picture.
Before you do that, Phil, why don't you unlock the screen? You've got one of the screens locked, so we're not seeing the speaker.
Oh, I'm sorry. I do.
Yep.
Cancel the spotlight video.
You've got the spotlight on the layout.
There it is. It's canceled. I'm sorry.
Now we got it. Thanks.
Okay, of course, we got to push Earl. Earl had to have done something interesting this week.
I would have to wake him up.
Yeah, nothing this week for Earl.
Nothing this week. Huh. Looks like Guy is
Okay.
doing.
So I don't know if this is going to work or not because I'm in my garage. So I apologize for any dropouts or crazy that'll happen going forward. But what we have here is we have the Merced roundhouse that I'm working on now. Work this week included adding another row of lights across the top here, interior. And then the outside is weathering all of the corrugated to stick down. Like that. This was above, so you're going to view it from like this angle. So there's some interior, I added some interior details, but not a lot because it's not visible at eye level. Other things I've worked on, and here we go moving, so this may not, let's grab one here. Experimenting with rust on corrugated. And this particular structure started out painted in sort of a fake green color. And then we've added and subtracted various washes of acrylic from the Vallejo rust set. And I got it to the point where it was super, super rusty, and then I pulled it back by painting back over with gray and various other things. And then a couple other things that people had mentioned. One of them is storage, right? So if we can come over here, I'm evolving from my
I think Guy just hit the limit of his Wi-Fi right there.
lids. I have about 30. Okay, let me come. How's that? Are we back again?
Yep, you're back now. Yeah, I think that's the limit of your Wi-Fi, right? From about there
Okay.
over to the
Thanks
boxes.
for letting me know.
by the way, guys,
So you could,
I
if
I
you
actually,
could see the Go ahead.
I had the same thing happen last week, and I moved my AP 15 feet, so it actually covers my workshop now. Because I actually have I have this thing where I have a separate
I may have to try that.
Yeah, actually, if you have a bigger house, they sell routers. They actually sell a separate thing called an access point. All it is the Wi-Fi stuff. And if you plug one of those into your router and you give it the same SSID as your router, it does this kind of movement stuff that you like. Cool.
Yeah, so anyway, that's what I've been doing.
So this was, these were some pictures took at one point. So that's that car float. And the problem is the lighting's not very good. But that's kind of what it looks like after it's been painted and rusted. Anyway. Yeah, I was pretty impressed with it. The little stands here that are came out very good on it. The Frenchman River. I thought their stuff was very good. Cool. I'm just pausing to let anyone else come on and see anything. So I don't know if there's if everybody's kind of worn out or not. I have the thing on doing the painted interiors. I can do that now, or we can wait and do it in a couple of weeks. If everybody's kind of ready to relax for the day, you guys' call.
You may want to wait a week or two on that, Phil.
Yeah, I kind of think so. I think we got a little bit. I think everybody is the challenge with the LocoFi stuff for me is after the first time after I heard it, I just spent a lot of time thinking about, wow, that was really pretty cool. I kept coming back to it. So that I think for some of us that becomes a challenge because I actually saw, a couple of comments that said, wow, this would have been really interesting for me. I thought about it a couple of years ago, and now starting to think about it is interesting. It's very interesting kind of looking at some of the comments that went by. So, well, I think with that, if there's no other focuses, maybe we'll call it a week, and everybody have a great week. Enjoy the NMRA event next week. We'll put that in there. I will get this up and recorded, or up on YouTube, and everybody have a great couple of weeks.
Thanks, Phil.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you, Phil.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Phil, thanks.